Welcome back, everybody. We're going to start working on section 17 in our tutorial document this evening. The topic for this particular section is security, and some of this stuff that we kind of did this week one a little bit, so some of this is going to be a little bit of repeat. However, there's a few extra things to talk about that we really kind of maybe only brushed against that first week. All right, I've been having issues here with my Visual Studio, and I'm just kind of stating it up front that there's a chance that I might blue screen again, and I've been kind of unhappy with my system lately, so I'm thinking maybe in subsequent weeks I might switch systems, and not knowing if it's really Visual Studio 2019 or something else that's up with my computer that I haven't had a chance to fix yet. All right, so just in case this video has an abrupt transition or ends all of a sudden, you'll understand why. But this is what we're going to work on today. So make sure you get everything up and ready to go. The first thing that we want to talk about is what they really mean when they talk about security. You can see the first topic in the chapter here is going to be a topic called authentication. So really what we're mentioning here are the considerations that we would apply to a .NET project where we do need to control access to certain aspects of the site or the application through a login from the user. And what are some of the approaches for doing that? The beauty of working in this environment, of course, that you guys have already learned, is it really doesn't take much to use the built-in tools that Windows has available. And really for most of us, that should be the primary focus as to how we enable user access to our applications. Although it is important to note that while you can tie this into existing infrastructure, our approach is really more one of building a web application where that authentication might actually be a separate animal, really compared to a typical application that might be in an enterprise environment. The author makes a little bit of a note here. He says in the latest release of .NET we can manage user identities with the following: the cloud, a SQL database, or local Windows Active Directory. And some of those are kind of a little sketchy. First of all, the cloud, for most of us, we're not really working in cloud environments. We talk a lot about it. We might even be using some cloud aspects and not cloud aspects and other things. But for an organization to really manage user identities in the cloud, that means that they're putting their domain controllers, if they're using a Windows system, or their user authentication systems, if they're third-party systems, out on servers that run in the cloud. And the act of actually logging in would kind of be transparent for those users. We can also store user identities in a database, which is what our applications will normally do if we enable authentication within our projects. We can also have users authenticate to whatever the local Active Directory service is for the particular machine that you're working on. So that can vary anywhere from the machine that you're sitting on to another machine on your network, or actually to a cloud machine that you're not even aware is actually doing all that work for you. All right. The first thing that they're going to have us do is begin a new application, and I'm going to start that process right now. So I'm going to follow these screens. I'm also going to move this off to screen number 2, as I always do, so that I can read from it while I have the whole screen here for recording. So why don't we go ahead and arrange our screens to get that happening. If you aren't a multi-screen person at home, I think you might want to start considering going that direction. Most developers that make that plunge usually never go back. Not sure why PowerPoint is open, but there it was. All right, let's go ahead and create a new ASP application. So let's go ahead and create a new project from your splash screen. I want to make sure that we select C#, Windows, and Web, and the framework that falls into that category is ASP.NET Web Applications with the .NET framework sitting behind it. It looks like they want us to call this one MVC security demo. So MVC security demo. I'm going to find a more practical place to put my work. And I'm trying to recall from last week where I was placing it. And, you know, that's really a good question, isn't it? I'm actually going to exit out of here really quick. And I'm going to look at recent projects and solutions to see where I was working last week, just so I'm working in the same location. So I was working on my D drive, a physical drive on this machine. Not an approach I typically like to take, because you know, what can happen to a local drive? Somebody can just take the machine away from me, and then all my work is gone. That's a problem. Hello. But what I'm going to do is I'm doing this because I've been having issues with a file that's been crashing my machine that I've traced to cloud-based file replication. So that's why I'm kind of avoiding it right now. But that's the location where I'm going to target my work. So once again, I'm going to go through that process of creating a new project, choose the correct framework, MVC security demo, and then I'm going to pick my D drive now that I know where to go. And you see I had a special folder set up for it. So let's select this folder as the root, and then we're going to go ahead. I'm going to place the solution and project in the same directory, and then go ahead and say create. All right, now we're going to get asked a series of questions. So here's where we need to be a little bit careful about our selections. First of all, we are going to start with a template this time. So instead of choosing empty like we've been doing so far in this tutorial document, we're actually finally going to switch back to the MVC template, which of course is going to bring into the mix for us, remember, Bootstrap and pre-configure a look and feel for our website, but it also gives us all the authentication tools as well. Notice that when I select that, it automatically selects the folders and core references for MVC. It's not even an option, right? You're choosing an MVC template, so it figures you're using MVC, so why not? The other thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we choose authentication. And I want to point this out because the screen in the book is a little bit different than what we have here. So it says select the MVC template, and you will see that the change authentication button is now enabled. And now for us, we don't have that in the same format. So if I'm here, right, notice how this change is grayed out. But if I choose the MVC template, then I can actually select the little thing. And what they want us to choose is individual user accounts for this. All right, once you get to the point where authentication is actually, you're in the dialog to create it, I want you to notice that there are 4 different options here and how the screen changes as you proceed. The default, of course, is no authentication, which you wouldn't select if you're in here anyhow, right? Unless you want to get the heck out. There's also individual user accounts. And then notice as you click through these, it tells you what it does with the accounts as it's creating it. So this one in particular says that for applications that store user profiles in a SQL Server database, users can register or sign in using their existing account for Facebook, Twitter, Google, Microsoft, or another provider. Isn't that cool? So like when you go to a website, you see one of those screens that say sign in with Google or sign in with Facebook. You can leverage that inside an ASP.NET application. It's a tool that's kind of built in. Now I can give you some thoughts about whether you should or should not ever use those interfaces. It really kind of depends on what you're doing. But whenever you're using a third-party system to authenticate yourself on a different website, you are in essence allowing that third party access to some of your information related to the website that you're signing into. And that's a big consideration. So if I'm signing in to a service that allows me to use my Google profile to sign in, I'm personally, I'm pretty reluctant to do that for personal things. I am not so reluctant for school things, for a lot of different reasons, but it's really kind of a preference thing. But for the most part, if you don't want to share information with third parties, I mean, does Microsoft really need more of our info? Does Google really need more of our info? Does, Facebook need more of our info? Those are questions you need to ask. And do they really need info from what you're doing at work? So those are things to consider. However, it's a popular thing out there and people do it just because it's easier. And you know what? Sometimes there are benefits to linking the information stream from one sign-in service to another because it enables certain features that you might not otherwise have. So that's really kind of an important thing too. If you switch to work or school accounts and then take a look here, this uses Active Directory or Azure Active Directory or Office 365, which really tells you a lot about those three systems, that they're basically all the same thing. They're really all using Active Directory to do your logins. It's just a matter of how you're connecting to the service. If you're on a school network like I am right now, anytime I log into a Windows-based machine, it tries to log me onto the domain, which means it's connecting to a machine called a domain controller that's running a piece of software called Active Directory that holds all the user accounts. So that's on a network. But if we are using that same service in a cloud-based environment, that's where it goes up to Azure. Or with some organizations, instead of having standalone Windows servers, they do have Office 365 and maybe Exchange email, but that all comes from the cloud. So once they log into Office 365, they have access to all of it. And you can actually link up your application to connect to that. And from the functional standpoint, when you think about that, that's really powerful, right? Because we don't have to code anything extra to do it. It's just really knowing the name of the server you're connecting to. And do you notice what happened here is it's picking up very automatically Gateway's Office 365 environment. Why is it doing that? Because I have other Office applications that connect to that, and it's recognizing that I connect to that on occasion, so it's trying to say, well, here's one of them, right? The other thing that you can do is you can select, like on-premise, for example, and then you would have to know the server name that you're connecting to on campus here that does our Active Directory. Or if you have a really complex environment, you can go into this and you might actually have multiple user authentication systems depending on how and where you're connecting. And so these are just interesting things to know. So I'm not going to mess with this right now because we're not going to use that. But you can also tie into your Windows authentication. Now this is a little weird considering we're building a web application. A web application is meant to be delivered on the internet, not on an individual user machine. So if I choose this option, this would be better if I was building a native .NET application that was intended to run on top of Windows, either a Windows Store application or a traditional application, .NET desktop application. And that way, if the user's signed into Windows, they can use it or whatever. We're going to stick with individual user accounts for now, and I think that's what the tutorial tells us to do. And it also goes through a pretty significant explanation over the next series of pages. So I'm just scrolling through them, like on the bottom of page 137 right now. So if you look really carefully at the bottom of page 136, it says this is the option we'll spend some time with in this module, and that is individual user accounts. So I had to find it in print. So the last line on page 136 is where he actually declares it. This is where I wish they actually had the steps numbered here. All right, so let's go ahead and make that selection, click OK. Now the other thing you'll notice is once we've made that choice, it does get listed here as individual user accounts, and then it also automatically configures HTTPS. Why? Well, simply this. When you type a password into a web application, unless you're encrypting your traffic, whatever you send for a username and password is in plain text over the internet, folks. Somebody savvy with the right piece of software and know-how can intercept that traffic and know exactly what your username and password are. So that's why HTTPS is considered required for something like this. So let's go ahead and create this. And just like we did that very first week that we started out, we are going to run this right away, and then we're going to notice that it has that built-in authentication system, just like the one that we had in the past. All right, so the application is now built out, and we haven't done any work to it. Remember, we're using a template here, so it does have already created a bunch of views, some models, some controllers. Most of these are related to the generic homepage that we have and the authentication system that we have present. Let's go ahead and run this. Let's get it building out up onto our screen. Now this is a little bit bigger than some of the other stuff that we've been doing lately. So in other words, because we're adding Bootstrap into the mix, because we are adding authentication and configuring secure transit through SSL, HTTPS, there's more to load up. So the initial launch of this server will take a little bit longer. All right, the application has finally loaded up, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually make sure I'm at 100% zoom and then go full screen with this so you can see that default Bootstrap appearance that comes with the MVC template. Just like we saw that very first week of class, it pre-built 3 really common pages, right? So it's got the home page, which we're already on, the about page, the contact page. We figure everybody's going to do those things. First thing they would like you to do in the book, so now we are on the bottom of page 139. We're going to go ahead and click register. And that should take us to a form to set up an account, albeit looks pretty slowly. All right, so now we're on the registration page, and they'd like you to put in some information. I'm going to use my school email account on purpose. There are some password restrictions here that are kind of automatic, and you can see they have a suggested password. I'll never remember that, so I'm not going to put it in, frankly. I'm going to use one that I know I will remember, that I hope will meet their password rules. I got capital letters, special symbols, and numbers all inside this. Okay, so I hit the register button, and then provided I clear their validation for things, I should be okay. Now if you look up at the top here, you can tell that I am logged in, and you can see that I can actually manage my account. So I can actually click on that and go in, and notice I can change my password and manage my external logins and some other details. I'm going to go ahead and log off just to make sure that that works, and then I'm going to log back in to make sure that works as well. And you should do all those steps as well. Just make sure that all of it is actually working. And then I'm going to log in. All right, and it seems like it's working just fine. All right, so that takes us through page 139, 140, 141, and the author did exactly all the same stuff I did. 142, just basically testing all of it to make sure that it's working okay. All right, so that completes section 17 all the way up through page 142 at this point. All right, now let's take a little bit of a look kind of behind the scenes a little bit. And right now the application is still running. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop the application from running. So I'm going to hit the stop button. And on page 143, the author has us look at how things are working kind of behind the scenes a little bit. So we're first going to start by looking at the views folder. We are going to go to the shared folder within it, and then we're going to look at this file here called layout CS.html. And what we're looking for in particular is how are they dynamically figuring out who we are as the user when we're logged in and putting it up on the screen. All right. So if you kind of start perusing the code and looking at the views, you'll start to notice a couple of different things. First of all, the spot where we actually do the login happens on the navigation bar. You guys remember that? And if you look at their code here, it's pretty easy to find the navigation, right? In fact, they have it in an unordered list, which is not uncommon. And then they have these list items with, an HTML action link. Obviously, it has some methodology in there for linking you up to the right pages. And then at the far end of that navigation bar is also this little HTML partial, and that's really kind of a new concept for us here too, called underscore login partial. And what I want you to take to heart here is that underscore has a specific meaning in MVC, and it indicates that the content that we're loading is partial content, not complete content. This is the way I'd like you to think about it. Think about when you were learning how to do PHP, and in PHP you would often stitch a page together by doing includes or requires, right? And what would you pull in with those includes? Maybe things that were pre-built so you didn't have to recode them. So it might be authentication, it might be a navigation bar, it might be a content area, it might be a footer, whatever it happens to be. In the MVC architecture, they call those partials. And right here, this little call is doing a call to pull in that login partial, which is the one that actually handles the authentication piece. Now, if they have a partial called login partial, chances are they should have a file that goes with it, and that's exactly correct. So if you look down here on the right in your Solution Explorer, you'll notice right below the layout, which we were looking at, there's also the login partial, and once I click on it, you'll see that there's a logic that sits behind it, right? So let's think about how logins work. If I visit a site cold, never been there before, we'll get the same kind of screen that we initially got, which is the option to register or log in. Now, notice how this whole structure here is inside an if statement, because what they're trying to figure out is the user authenticated? If they're already authenticated, right, you're going to give them something different on the screen than if you would if they're not, right? You'd give them the option to log out instead of log in, for example. So notice that that's exactly what you do, is you give them the option to log out. If they're authenticated, they get the option to log out, or perhaps work with their account, right? If they're not authenticated, that's when you leave the registration button up and the login button up. I mean, without really getting into the details of how each statement works, this is the general logic here, right? But it also shows you that that little authentication piece, the piece that puts the menu items on the menu, the right ones at the right time, is right here. So doesn't it make sense to do it this way? Think about that. Any page that you work on, right, you can pull this into the nav section, and then this does all the logic and all the layout at the same time. And now this is very heavily written in Razor syntax too. So the beauty of this is that it does have an HTML extension to it. It has the CS HTML. And then the Razor directives are the ones that begin with the @ sign, where we're really intermingling basically that Razor syntax, which is really, a bastardized, C#, into having programming code right within our HTML structure that operates conditionally. Isn't that cool? So if you make a comparison and think of it like PHP, where you might put in a little PHP statement, and if something's true, then you output certain HTML. If not, you carry on. Remember, with Razor syntax, the beauty of it is that I don't have to escape out of my HTML and then back into my, programming code. It coexists beautifully. It just allows it to happen without like a bunch of weird, switching from PHP or back and forth kind of thing. So I think that's really kind of powerful. All right, I'm moving now down to the bottom of page 145. So the example at this point is, what if you have content on your site or on a page that you want to protect from unauthorized users? This is a common thing that happens in web applications. All right, so what they're suggesting is that we go ahead and create a new controller for the project, and that way we can demonstrate that concept in action. So let's go ahead and go up to the controllers folder and do a right click and then choose add, and then add a controller. All right, you get the dialog up on the screen. They're going to want us to start with an empty controller this time. We're not going to do anything particularly fancy. Go ahead, click add. They want us to call this secret controller to kind of demonstrate the concept that we can isolate it. Go ahead, click add. We take a moment to scaffold out the structure. All right, so you can see the secret controller is now listed here. And we're going to actually have a couple of different methods inside here. So there's one that's already in here, and right now it's set as a action result, and we're going to switch that so that it is, well, actually, what we're going to do is we're just going to remove this. We're not even going to have an index method. We're going to create two brand new ones, and I'm going to try to see if I can kind of sort of copy this. I'm at the very bottom of page 146 right now in the document, and I'm going to paste in the first part of that. And they really want us to do this, just to make sure that our curly brackets all line up. And then we'll add one more method right below it. Let's just clean that up a little bit too. All right, so we have two content results that are going to come up on the screen. And then notice that the whole thing is once we call secret, it'll return the content, secret information here, secret informations it actually says. All right, well, I'll fix that. So apparently they're good coders, but not good in English, right? And then we're also going to have one called public info, and we're going to put public information in that one. All right. Now, if you run the application right now, which is what they do, so I got the server started here. Let's bring this over from screen number 2. And then, of course, to access those things, we know what the strategy is for the URLs, right? So it will load up the Bootstrap site that we have, so we got to just be careful and patient to hopefully wait for this thing to load up. There we go. a little faster than last time. And then we created the secret controller, so I'm typing secret onto the URL, and then we have two methods inside there, right? We have one called secret and one called public info. So first thing I'm going to just type is secret, and it should pull up that text that we put in there, right? That worked. The next thing that they want us to do is put in the other option, which is public info is what they call the next method, and that one seems to be working too. Right now, with or without being logged in, if you want to make the point of it, well, I'm already logged in. See that? It's already got me logged in. So you probably say, well, of course you can see both. Well, even if I log out and then type those URLs again, well, let's do that. So secret, secret, it still comes up. Not what we would, want to happen. And if you put in public info, that still comes up. And that's when we want to come up either way. So for us to be able to basically block this content, it's not that difficult to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is stop the server from running. And this is so painfully simple. I think that maybe, I'm hoping you will marvel at it, because it really requires almost like no code. You just simply add this directive here, and it's really it's an attribute basically that we're throwing at the application inside of square brackets. Now we saw this type of technique used for a couple of other things, including validation and whatever, with the square bracketed approach, where I just simply say right above the one I want to keep secret, which is the secret one, I just throw that in, and now only authorized users will be able to see this aspect of it or trigger this particular method. Let's go ahead and save that and actually give it a try. So let's go ahead and launch the application. And once again, on screen 2. Let's go ahead and try to put that URL in. So I'm going to go to secret, secret, right? I am not logged in right now. What does it do? It asks me to log in, which it should, because it's protected content. So let's see if I remember my password already. Pretty sad if I forgot it 10 minutes later, but it happens. All right. And now you see in the background how the secret information did come up. Okay. So if I go back and I log off and then try the public info, I can still get to that. All right, so that's a really, really simple way to control content. And it's really powerful, right? I mean, it doesn't take much to control access to certain parts of the site. And so when you start getting a little bit more complex with this, you have to start thinking in different ways in order how to prevent people from messing with things. One thing that they demonstrate in the book at the bottom of page 149 is they take this authorized statement and they move it up outside of the controller, right above the controller. If I do that, in fact, let's go ahead and actually do that. I'm going to have to stop the application from running. I'm always a little, hesitant, because it's like once you get it running, you don't want to turn it off, but sometimes you have to. So here's what they're suggesting. You might actually want your whole controller to be protected. Okay? And you can accomplish that by doing this. Nobody will be able to hit anything inside of this controller without being authorized. But what if, as demonstrated on page 150, you want to allow access to one part of it, but not all of it. So you can do this little command, allow anonymous, above the one where you do want people to have access. That's kind of an interesting approach. So if I had, let's say, 20 methods inside here that all did different things, and I want them all protected, it's kind of redundant to put in authorized 20 times, right? It's easier to put it outside and then allow anonymous access to one particular one. Let's make sure that that works as well. So let's go ahead and launch this. All right, once again, screen number 2. You guys recall if I logged out last time? Because it's obviously maintaining my session information, right? Even though I close the browser, shut the application down, I come back. It is. So my thinking is, if I wasn't logged in, okay, I wasn't. So let's try secret. It should ask to log in, and it's doing it. All right. What if I try to go to public? Notice that one I can get to it. We'll assume that if I log in, and really I should try it, I shouldn't just take it on faith. Just make sure I can get to it. It would be pretty sad if I couldn't. Yeah, that's not the right password. That's why I try not to save them for applications like this. But there you go, the proof that it's all working as intended. So kind of an interesting approach, not too complex to do. Is the controller the best place to do this? Clearly it is. Because since the controllers are really kind of directing traffic in your application, that is the most logical place to control the authentication. All right, folks, that completes section 17. So this video ends here, and we're going to take a short break here in class.